I remember it like it just happened yesterday. It's the kind of thing that a mother does not forget. They had come and told me how he was arrested while praying, led away in the middle of the night. My baby boy arrested for teaching people about God the Father and for healing folks, giving them opportunity at life that they had never experienced before. He was arrested for telling people that God loved them and their sins were forgiven. I was there in the crowd as the Jewish leaders and men shouted for a murderer to be set free and for my son to be killed. I followed and watched as the soldiers mocked him and teared his back apart by whipping him. He never once cried out in pain. It just wasn't his way. As I watched them whip him, I remembered the night when he was born. Joseph and I were so elated to find a place for the baby to be delivered, and when he was born, he was absolutely perfect. Crying like all babies do, and we held him and counted his little fingers and his toes. As I watched his back being torn open by soldiers who were cruel and unrelenting, I remembered how we held him that first night, rubbing his back, listening to him coo and watching him peacefully fall asleep. No, a mother doesn't soon forget these kind of events. He was so strong and yet so weak as they clothed him in purple, taunted him and spit in his face. They jammed that crown of thorns on his head, causing him to bleed even more. I used to run my fingers through his hair. He was a little boy. Tell him how good he was and what a good helper he was. Compliment him for his projects as Joseph trained him in the ways of a carpenter. And even as a man, when I would hear him teaching or saw how he interacted with his disciples, I would make him bend over so I could run my fingers through his hair and tell him what a good man he was. I watched as they gave him the cross to carry, and he started to walk. His spirit so strong, but his body so weak. He stumbled and fell. As if he wasn't suffering enough, he had to fall and bruise his knee along the way. I just wanted to be able to run to him and kiss it and make it better like I had when he was a little boy and would fall and stumble along the way. The other women held me tightly and reminded me that I couldn't go to him. And of course, John was there. Such a great comfort, such a horrible time. It seemed like we would never get there, in that place outside of town where the criminals were crucified. We continued the long, agonizing walk, and he would stumble a few more times along the way. At one point, the soldiers seemed to notice that he probably wouldn't make it, so they called on a man who was passing by, Simon. I found out later his name was, to carry the cross for him. When we finally made it to Golgotha, I was filled with these mixed emotions of relief that the walk was done and terror at what was coming next. This amazing man who called me mom, who picked up little children to sit in his lap while he told them stories about God, and who listened to the women no one else would listen to, who had such compassion for all who encountered him. Stripped as naked as the day he was born, to try and embarrass him. But he wasn't one who would be embarrassed, because he had this mission from the time he was a youth, that he would be about his Father's business. Oh, I remember that day when we had gone to temple, and Joseph and I both thought he was with friends, but he wasn't, and we discovered that he wasn't with us and traveled back to Jerusalem searching all over for him and found him at the temple. He was so wise, and he also had that youthful innocence as he said, "Mom, didn't you know it would be about my Father's business?" That was always what he was about. So while they stripped him and tried to put him to shame, he was as courageous and strong and wise and compassionate as he always had been. I heard the thud as the cross dropped to the ground and they pushed his body up against the rough wood. The sound of the hammers pounding the nails into my little boy's hands and feet. No longer a little boy, but a man. But yeah. Your firstborn is always your little boy. And then they raised it up. When he was born, we were so glad to hear him cry, know that he had been filled up with the breath of life, and now I listened as he gasped for every single breath. And even as he gasped for every single breath, this Son of God, this child of mine, looked at those who did him harm and offered them forgiveness. At about noon, the whole earth went dark, and I know that his Father in heaven was mourning with me. He looked at me and my boy and told me that John would now be my son. He said, "It is finished." And his suffering came to an end as he died. The soldiers went to break his legs so that he would die before the Jewish festival that was about to start, but they saw that he was already dead, so they struck his side with a spear, jamming the spear up into him, and water and blood came out. This merciful man, Joseph, Joseph of Arimathea, he came and got permission to take the body down. This child of mine that as an infant I wrapped in swaddling cloths, I now wrapped up in grave linens. We took him to Joseph's borrowed tomb, laid him in it, and I watched as Pilate's soldiers rolled this heavy stone in front of the tomb and stood guard. My son died. The Messiah, the one to be the Savior of the world, who was about his Father's business, was graveyard dead. The other women dragged me away from his tomb. And we went home to pray that we would not be next. And to mourn the saddest day in all of humanity.